but I wanted to ask you about Brexit and the European Union. And um, as a foreigner living in the UK, um, I don't I don't necessarily celebrate Brexit or have anything against it. I try to adapt myself to the new situation,
Yeah.
and I try to understand the reason, the rationale behind the decision. And you've spoken in defense of Brexit, and also Sir Roger Scruton very eloquently defended the idea of Brexit. And I can completely understand why would a country such as the UK would prefer to leave. What about places like Bulgaria, where the Bulgarian experience is, we were on the side of Germany in both world wars, and after the Second World War, we were not through our choice. I think we were just a pawn on the board. We were put in the Soviet camp, and then Big Brother then collapsed, and after 45 years of Soviet-led development and Soviet-style existence, Bulgaria basically switched sides and looked westward, but not towards London. We looked towards Brussels.
Yes.
And now Bulgaria strikes me as, the architectural legacy of communism, but you put the blue flag with the yellow stars on top of the buildings.
Yes.
And it has not resulted in, like, certain Eastern European countries have done much better
Bulgaria
in the European Union.
Yeah.
And a lot of people in Bulgaria are against the European Union, not because they're enthusiastically pro-Russia or something, but because at least during the 80s, Bulgaria had something to show for itself, whereas now we're just used to hearing that Bulgaria is the poorest and the most corrupt country in the European Union after 15 years of membership. And people are like, well, if after 15 years of EU membership results in this, then did we make the right choice?
Well, is that the right comparison? Because you see, it depends where you started off.
Yes.
I mean, if 15 years ago you were the poorest country in the European Union, then all it means is that you could have done as well as other countries, but you would still be the poorest. So just the fact that somebody has to be the poorest, after all.
Yes. In order for us to climb one position up, somebody needs to go down.
Yes. And I can understand why Bulgarians think it's a good idea to be part of the European Union, because it's a small and, dare I say it, rather weak country. It hasn't, it was for many years under Ottoman domination.
Yeah.
It's always been dominated by somebody or other.
Yes.
And you might say, well, the European Union, at least being member of something larger, prevents us from being kicked about by somebody else. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, of course, it's very difficult to see that the European Union is going to take the interests of Bulgaria very strongly into account when it makes decisions. I mean, it isn't going to take, because Bulgaria doesn't really count for anything. And but of course, it will get subventions from Brussels. I mean, I'm sure the subventions, the first thing that they underpin is the corruption, I would imagine. I mean, there's nothing like getting money from outside to make a government corrupt. But I would imagine there isn't any, I don't know at all about Bulgaria, I don't know anything about it, I would imagine there is no simple solution to its various problems, and that if they say it's the most corrupt, I mean, if it's more corrupt than Romania, it's doing pretty well, I would think, but as far as corruption is concerned. But as with Brexit, I mean, we have to recognize that the problems of Britain exist, many of the problems exist whether we are in the European Union or out of the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
So that, for example, what I would see as the extremely low cultural standard of a very large percentage of the population and the very poor educational level of a very large portion of the population, which in large part has been brought about by centralized education. That exists whether we're in Europe or not. So it might be a necessary condition of our solving our problems that we are out of Europe, but it's certainly not a sufficient one. And there's every evidence, every reason to suppose that the government can make a terrible mess of coming out of Europe. Although it is also an opportunity. So I don't know, in Bulgaria's case, I can well imagine, I can well see why people want to be part of the European Union, because the country is a very small and vulnerable one. Not that being in the European Union makes it less vulnerable, actually.
What would your friend, the developmental economist, say about if a country wants to improve its standing?
Well, he would say that he would ascribe a very large degree of responsibility or importance to the culture of a country. So if you take the question of say corruption, I mean, corruption is not necessarily inimical to development. There are various kinds of corruption. I once wrote an essay saying that the corruption in Italy was the saving of Italy.
Yes, I remember that, yes. Sometimes a little bit of corruption helps.
Well, it helps in the situation where the government is trying to control everything.
Yes.
Because you can cut through that control by corruption. In Britain, we had not only a stupid bureaucracy, but a non-corrupt bureaucracy. Well, that's even worse, because it prevents anything from being done. But in Bulgaria, I don't know. I mean, if corruption is a way of life, and if it is so extensive that it prevents anything from being done, then obviously there needs to be some kind of cultural change, but how you bring it about, I don't know.